Hey guys, Spud here, as always. And today we have a question and answer video for RAZBAM's upcoming DCS F-15E Strike Eagle module for DCS World. Now, this video originally was going to be kind of a question and answer session about the history and kind of the service life of the F-15E Strike Eagle, akin to what I did for the A1/AD Skyraider question and answer video that I did a couple months back now. However, as I was gathering questions from my community at large, kind of a recurring theme started to pop up that I've seen kind of happen throughout the wider DCS World community when it comes to the Strike Eagle. And that is, of course, a lot of confusion out there about what we're actually getting with the F-15E Strike Eagle module itself for DCS itself. So today's question and answer video is going to kind of morph into more of a Q&A about the module itself and what you can expect from it. Now, RAZBAM has put out a ton of information out there over the years about the Strike Eagle module. However, it's been kind of in lots of different places on their Facebook, on Twitter, on podcasts, in their Discord, and not everybody is on all of those different platforms and can go out there and seek all that different information to kind of put together a coherent package of what you're going to actually be getting with this module. So the intent of this video is going to be to go through and actually compile a lot of this information together in one spot that you guys are going to be able to listen to, whether you're driving, you're doing your chores, you're doing your laundry, you're cooking, whatever it might be. So that way you can get just a really good, full, solid picture in one place with a whole bunch of eyeballs and ears on it here on my channel. So let's go ahead and get started, guys. Alright guys, today's Q&A video is going to be broken down into two distinct parts. The first part, we're going to be going over a summation and kind of amalgamation of all the different questions that I received on my Discord community from my community members. The second part of this video, we're going to be going over the frequently asked questions document built by Notso, who is one of the subject matter experts that is helping RAZBAM build the F-15E Strike Eagle module for DCS. Now, for the second part, Notso was the original creator of this document, and I'm just trying to help get some more eyeballs onto this document, and I'll have a link for you guys to download it pinned in the comments section down below if you would like to actually read the document for yourself. It's some very interesting stuff and some very illuminating stuff, and that's why I am trying to kind of bring it to the masses with this video. So with that in mind, guys, let's go ahead and hop right into our questions. Alright guys, let's go ahead and hop in with the very first question from my community. Is the DCS F-15E multi-crew capable? The answer to this question is an emphatic yes. The DCS F-15E Strike Eagle will be multi-crew capable from the very first day of early access release. This has been stated multiple times by RAZBAM themselves on almost every piece of information they've released about the aircraft. And it's still a question that's being asked quite often. I believe this is still being asked because it has also been stated multiple times in multiple places that the F-15E can be flown and be combat capable with only one person in the aircraft in the front seat. However, that does not necessarily mean that you're going to be combat effective. It is required to have somebody in the backseat to relieve some of that pilot workload off the pilot and get the absolute most out of the DCS F-15E Strike Eagle and the real aircraft as well. Alright guys, moving on to question 2 from my community. Will the DCS F-15E have a gesture-like AI for the Wizzo? This question is also an emphatic yes, and has been stated so by RAZBAM in multiple different places over multiple different mediums now. Now, I think the reason why people are also asking this question still to this day is the fact that RAZBAM at first stated they were not going to be building an AI for the F-15E, and then reversed course and said that they are going to be building an AI for the F-15E now. Now, it has also been stated that this AI will most likely not be available at early access release of this aircraft. But like we already stated, you can fly the aircraft in single player from the front seat by yourself, no problem. It's just better to have somebody in the back seat. Now, Ron, the owner of RAZBAM, has stated on multiple occasions that he does not like the gaminess or arcadiness of Jester or George or Petrovich, and is going with a different design philosophy for the AI for the F-15E. Now, it's yet to be seen what that really means and how that really translates to in-game in DCS, but it's definitely something really interesting in my opinion. So moving on to question number 3, and we get this question a ton as well. Will we be able to remove the CFTs, which are of course the conformal fuel tanks that you see mounted on the left and right hand sides of the aircraft right along the engine nacelles? Now, this has also been stated multiple times as a definite no. The CFTs will not be able to be removed from the DCS F-15E Strike Eagle. Now, there are 2 distinct reasons as to why this is. The first reason is, of course, that RAZBAM would have to create 2 fully fledged flight models for the F-15E, one with CFTs and one without. Now, the second answer to this question is, especially in the USAF, F-15E Strike Eagles would never fly in combat and never fly operationally, whether that be for training or combat, with their CFTs removed. They are an integral part of the F-15E Strike Eagle package and are only removed for testing purposes, testing after maintenance purposes, things of that nature. And the targeting pod, as well as the nav FLIR pod, need to have the CFTs installed in order to be installed underneath the left and right hand engine nacelles. So again, the CFTs will not be removable. I think this comes from the fact that a lot of folks see a lot of pictures out there of Singaporean F-15 SGs with their CFTs removed performing in air shows. And while the Singaporeans may do this, this is not something that the USAF, which this aircraft for DCS is actually an F-15E, it's just something that the USAF just doesn't do. Moving on, how will the F-15E compare in air-to-air to other Blue 4 fighters in-game? Well, I think that this is a harder question to answer, having not flown it in DCS, and of course having not flown the F-15E in real life. The F-15E, if I had to make an educated guess, is going to be somewhere in between flying the F-15C that we have currently in DCS now in the Flaming Cliffs 3 package of aircraft, and the F-14B Tomcat fully loaded up, pretty darn heavy. The aircraft is not fly-by-wire. It is a large aircraft, of course, and it's going to be a lot heavier than the F-15C that we currently have in DCS because of those CFTs, even when completely clean. But it also has the F-100 Pratt & Whitney 229 engines, which are more powerful than the engines that are currently installed in the DCS F-15C Flaming Cliffs 3 aircraft. So it'll be really interesting to see, but the F-15E is going to be more of your go-to bomber and strike and interdiction aircraft than it is going to be your total full-up air superiority aircraft. At least that's kind of my educated guess. Moving on to the next question. Will there be a Jester-type command wheel? The answer to this is it is unknown at this time. Like I stated earlier, Ron, the head of RAZBAM, has stated that he doesn't really like the arcadey gaminess of the Jester AI or Petrovich or George that are currently in DCS and wants to go with something that's a little bit more automated and a little less gamey. So again, we don't really know how that's going to be actually translated into game, but it is definitely something that'll be very interesting to see what RAZBAM can come up for with that. And again, the F-15E can be flown with one person in the aircraft in the front seat and be combat capable. You're just not going to be quite as effective as if you have somebody in your back seat helping you out and reducing that workload on the pilot. How does the TFR, that's terrain following radar, system work in the F-15E? I'm familiar with the system on the F-111 with its internal system with an actual radar. But it doesn't seem like there is any added space for a TFR in the nose when comparing the F-15D to the F-15E. So to put it simply, where is it and how does it work? Because it seems like it isn't an actual radar like the F-111. Well, whoever asked this question, I just copied and pasted your question into the document here because I thought it was a really interesting one. And you are correct. There is no TFR internal into the F-15E's airframe. The TFR actually lives in the AN/AAQ 13 navigation pod, which is the navigation pod of the Lantern system that integrates both an IR camera as well as a terrain following radar into that little pod that lives on the right-hand side of the F-15E under the right-hand engine nacelle. So the way that I know how it works from a very basic point of view is the radar will map the terrain out in front of the F-15E, while the IR camera will also generate kind of an idea of what is out there in front of the aircraft, and it will compare the two and allow the autopilot in the jet to maintain an altitude above all the terrain features, whether that be power lines, trees, hills, mountains, valleys, whatever it is. And the pilot can actually be completely hands-off throttle and stick and allow the autopilot to fly the aircraft down low right over the terrain using a mix of both the radar picture and the IR FLIR picture that is coming from the navigation pod. Now, the FLIR picture from the navigation pod can also be displayed up on the HUD of the F-15E, and that's why the F-15E has that massive wide-angle HUD, which I am really excited for, to give the pilot as good of a view of the terrain out in front of him when flying those low-level penetrations as possible. So I know that a lot of you guys out there are going to correct me down in the comment section down below, but from a really zoomed out, just very simplistic view, it's kind of the radar and the FLIR system are working together to guide the autopilot through that terrain. And of course, the pilot can take over and fly manually. Next question is, will they bring any AI assets for the F-15E module like the KC-10? Which weapons and pods will be able to be used at first at early access stage? And will we get any non-USAF F-15 liveries like the IAF, JASDF, and RSAF? So a couple different questions here that I think we can answer pretty quickly. RAZBAM has not said whether or not they're going to be adding any other AI assets along with the F-15E, but I think it would be very cool to get a KC-10 integrated into the base version of DCS and not have to use any mods for that. Now, the weapons and pods load at early access stage, we'll kind of get into that more in part 2 of this video. But basically, you can kind of think of all of the weapons that you can see on pictures of F-15s, or F-15Es, I should say, in the mid-2000s, so 2005, 2006, 2007-ish timeframe, when the F-15E had the Suite 4 Plus software system integrated into them. So that's going to be your full range of JDAMs, your full range of laser-guided bombs, so the Paveway series, you know, AGM-130s, all those kinds of funky weapons, the GBU-15 Hobo, all these kinds of things will be integrated into the aircraft. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that the pod that will be available for early access with the F-15E will be the Lightning targeting pod, which is kind of the standard targeting pod that's on basically all the modules in DCS, from the F-16, F-18, AV-8B, so on and so forth. Now, I know that RAZBAM has stated that they want to integrate the Lantern pod as well as the Sniper targeting pod, but I think that'll probably be coming towards the end of early access or in the release version. Now, will we get any non-USAF F-15 liveries like IAF, JASDF, or RSAF? So we've already seen that RAZBAM is putting together kind of an external kit to make the F-15E look more like an F-15I RAAM for the Israeli Air Force. Now, we also had a couple of people asking about the JASDF, which is the Japan Air Self-Defense Force. And keep in mind, guys, that the Japan does not fly the F-15E or its variants. So they do not have their own version of the Strike Eagle, like the Singaporeans, the South Koreans, things of that nature. The IAF's like kind of external modification kit to turn the F-15E into the F-15I for just kind of like an outside kind of look to turn the cockpit black and give the burner cans their activation protectors or their actuation protectors that kind of, they call them flower petals on the back of the burner cans of the aircraft. You can use that to make a really good representation of like the F-15K, the F-15SG, as well as the F-15S and SA that belong to South Korea, Singapore, and Saudi Arabia, respectively. And they also ask, will RSAF skins be in there as well? I would have to imagine that RAZBAM would include Royal Saudi Air Force skins for the F-15E. And again, that the kind of that external body kit they're building to make the F-15E look like the F-15I will work really well for the F-15S as well, because they do actually have the actuator covers that they kind of, again, they call them like flower petals on the back of the burner cans of the engines there. The F-15S is really interesting in that the F-15S originally could not carry smart weapons on the CFTs. That was originally changed and made so that way the RSAF could carry smart weapons on the CFT stations of their F-15 Strike Eagles. And that was a way to kind of placate Israel, because Israel was just receiving their F-15Is when Saudi Arabia put in their order for F-15Ss. And that was a way to placate the Israelis and say, yes, you have the better F-15. You still have the comparative advantage in the Middle East. And then as time went on and Saudi-Israeli relations improved throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, the RSAF were allowed to then redo their F-15Ss to allow them to carry smart weapons on their CFT stations. Very, very interesting stuff. The Strike Eagle in foreign service is just so interesting to me, and I really love reading about it. So moving on to the next question here. Will training missions come with the module? I'm sure there will be some training missions that come with the module. Again, I think with the limitations of DCS, training missions with modules aren't all that great. I think you're much better off reading stuff. And Baltic Dragon is putting together what looks like to be a really, really cool, interactive, and very helpful manual for the F-15E that I think will help you guys out a ton, even more so than any training missions that would be included with the module. Will the joint helmet-mounted queuing system be included with the module? To start off in early access, that is a no, actually, and that has been stated multiple times by RAZBAM themselves in various different media forms. That is because the F-15E in USAF usage was one of the very last tactical fighters to have the JHICMIS integrated into the aircraft itself. The reason being for this is the actual role of the F-15E is as a strike fighter and interdiction aircraft, where the need for a joint helmet-mounted queuing system for the pilot or the WISO is less than it would be for, say, F-15Cs or F-15Ds, I suppose, for training, as well as, F-16s that are potentially flying defensive or offensive counter-air missions, whereas the F-15E is going to be one of the last aircraft types to actually be put onto a offensive or defensive counter-air type mission set. So as a result, in at least USAF service, the F-15E was one of the last aircraft to have the JHICMIS integrated into it. And as a result of having a Suite 4 Plus aircraft in DCS, that's kind of that 2005, 6, 7 kind of time frame, the JHICMIS will not be installed. Now, RAZBAM has definitely stated that they are looking into integrating the JHICMIS into the F-15E at a later time as more information becomes available to them, or as they start expanding out the aircraft to be kind of more of a Frankenjet, integrating different things from later on down the road of the F-15E service life and further towards the beginning of the F-15E service life. Now, the next question is, they have confirmed the sniper pod is coming. Which features does the sniper have currently that the Lightning does not? I think the biggest thing there that is really going to make a difference for DCS World players, that is going to be the fact that the sniper pod can actually broadcast images in color to the cockpit of the jet that's using it, as well as it can broadcast those images in color to other assets through data link. And the Lightning 3 targeting pod, which I believe the newest Lightning that we have in DCS is only the Lightning 2, can also do the same thing. Now, the sniper pod also can zoom in a lot further, and it has a longer laser range than the Lightning pod does, and of course the Lantern pod as well. However, I think that wouldn't really make a big difference in DCS right now because terrain will only load for a targeting pod within about 42 nautical miles at my last test of that. So I don't really think that a sniper pod in DCS would have all that much functionality over the top of what we already have in terms of the Lightning 2 pod that's integrated into most modules in DCS. Next question, of course, is, will we be able to carry nuclear weapons on the Strike Eagle in-game? And that is a definite no, 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 no. The B-61 will not be integrated into the F-15E in-game. Eagle Dynamics has stated that they will not bring nuclear weapons to DCS in any form beyond what is already integrated into the MiG-21. Now, I don't know if that's from a gameplay perspective, a hardware kind of perspective where we're going to melt most PCs with nuclear weapons in DCS, or it's kind of more of a political thing where, we don't want to have people kind of simulating nuclear war in DCS, I guess. And honestly, it's probably a combination of all three of those different things, and I don't have any problem with that. A nuclear war in DCS doesn't sound all that much fun to me anyway. Did the F-15E ever do anti-ship work in the Gulf Wars? That is a definite no. The F-15E was brand new when the Gulf War opened up in 1991. In fact, the F-15E was so new that it wasn't yet fully operational. But the aircraft had such powerful capabilities, especially with its synthetic aperture radar capabilities, that the USAF actually rushed it into IOC and rushed it to Saudi Arabia to participate in the Gulf War because of the Scud threat and the mobile Scud threat that was in the deserts of Western Iraq that were then firing Scuds onto Israel to hopefully have Israel retaliate against Iraq to then break apart the Arab coalition members in their fight against Saddam Hussein. So the F-15E was used almost solely for those really deep penetration and interdiction missions to go after those Scuds, as well as to bomb airfields and other strategic targets located way in the furthest reaches of Iraq when it comes to the reach of the coalition at that time. The F-15E has only very recently been brought to the anti-ship game via the Quick Strike upgrade to JDAMs to allow JDAMs to attack and destroy shipping targets, which of course makes sense with the whole pivot to the Pacific, in which we might find Strike Eagles attacking and destroying Chinese warships or merchant ships, things of that nature. Moving on to the next question here. Since the pilot and Wizzo have mostly the same controls for the aircraft, do both have the same qualifications and could fly in either seat, unlike the Rio and the F-14, for instance? So the answer to this question is really interesting and kind of comes back into a little bit of history, I suppose. But no, the USAF does not have pilots and Wizzos be both qualified for both seats. And there's a really good reason for this. Pilots are their own kind of specialty and training track, where Wizzos are their own specialty and training track. Now, early on, when the USAF started flying the F-4 Phantom back in the 1960s and going and bringing these aircraft to Vietnam, both crew members were pilots. And that's why the USAF really wanted to have dual controls in their Phantoms, starting with the F-4C, then the F-4D, E, G, and so on and so forth. And that's because early on, the USAF put new pilots in the backseat to act as the Wizzo, and then as they gained experience, they would then move to the front seat and start flying Phantoms from the front seat. And they realized over time that this created tension between the responsibilities of the Wizzo and the responsibilities of the pilot. And so it didn't lead to the best working situation for the backseater and the front seater to get the most capability out of the aircraft and the most capability out of the pilot and the Wizzo. And so as a result, the USAF just went back to the idea of having two separate jobs. You have a pilot and you have a Wizzo, and they don't trade back and forth. Now, the idea of having dual controls between the front seat and the back seat persisted on with having the added safety margin of having the guy in the backseat having some controls in case the guy in the front seat does make a big mistake and the guy in the back can catch it. Now, I think in reality, if you took like a really experienced Wizzo and a really experienced pilot, they could absolutely swap back and forth in those seats, no problem. But they're not trained to do so, and they're not allowed to do so. But that doesn't mean that eventually they would develop the skills that would be okay with that. Moving on. The F-15E's avionics look very similar to the FA-18. Are they similar in terms of aircraft controls and system management? So yes, they are both McDonnell Douglas, the then Boeing products, and very similar also with the Apache, which the Apache is now a Boeing product as well. There are things within the avionics systems that definitely rhyme. The control column and throttle between the two aircraft are identical. However, there are some definitely some distinct differences between how the avionics work between the FA-18 and the F-15E. However, if you are, say a Harrier pilot or an FA-18 pilot in DCS, and then you hop over to the F-15E, I think you'll probably get the hang of it pretty quickly, because like I said, all of these things between the aircraft kind of rhyme, but they're not exactly the same. But I think it'll definitely help to be very well versed in the avionics of, say, the Hornet or the Harrier or the Apache before you hop into the F-15E. It definitely can't hurt, that's for sure. What is the typical breakdown in responsibilities of the pilot and Wizzo in air-to-air, air-to-ground, and navigation? Well, unfortunately, I don't really know all that much about this. However, I would say that it's probably going to be in air-to-air, the pilot is going to be flying the jet. He's going to have his head out of the cockpit. He's going to be looking for threats. He's going to be flying the jet, of course. He's going to be actually pulling the trigger to actually fire those forward-firing weapons like AMRAAM, Sidewinders, and the gun. Whereas the guy in the back seat, he's going to be kind of like in the F-14. He's going to be using the radar. He's going to be looking down a lot in the BVR portion of the fight, using the radar, sorting targets, getting things locked up, and then telling the pilot to fire when the Wizzo wants him to fire on AMRAAM, things of that nature. Then once they get into kind of a within visual range, into the merge, and then of course into a dogfight, then the Wizzo is going to be heads out of the cockpit. He's going to be in charge of dumping countermeasures like flares, chaff, things of that nature, working the jammer. And of course, he's going to be looking for and keeping his eyes on bandits as they're in the merge and in the dogfight. For the air-to-ground picture, the pilot is going to be, of course, flying the airplane, and he's going to be probably looking outside, scanning for threats, SAM launches, enemy aircraft, MiGs, whatever. The guy in the back seat, of course, is going to be running the targeting pod, running the radar if that's required in the air-to-ground mode. And the pilot up front can, of course, help out in terms of, looking at the feed from the targeting pod and say, oh yeah, there's a tank, move the pod up and to the right a little bit. Okay, there's your tank, things of that nature to help out. Of course, because everything is mirrored between the front and the back seat in the F-15E, the pilot can also take over, like, say, using the targeting pod to scan and look for tanks or whatever, while the guy in the back is using the air-to-ground radar in SAR mode to, say, pick out a Scud or something of that nature. This is, kind of all conjecture from my part. I'm sure that other people will correct me down in the comment section down below. Then navigation, I would have to say, is probably going to be more or less both pilots having kind of equal responsibility for avoiding collision with other aircraft, keeping, situational awareness on where they are and where they're going. The guy in front's obviously going to be flying. The guy in back can fly if the guy in the front gets a little tired or has to use a piddle pack or, whatever it might be. Of course, there's an autopilot in the F-15 as well. So, it's kind of a toss-up, I think, for navigation. I think it kind of depends on the crew and their comfort with each other and whatnot. I don't know if I think that probably the Air Force has the guy in the backseat do most of the radio communications, but I'm not totally sure about that. But again, I'm sure you guys will correct me in the comments section down below. Next question is, with the introduction of the F-15E, is there any chance we could be looking at some new weapons, maybe the GBU-28, etc.? RAZBAM has stated in multiple different communications that the GBU-28 will hopefully be coming with the F-15E. However, new weapons and new weapons building and integration into DCS World is the domain of Eagle Dynamics. However, we have been shown on multiple occasions that Eagle Dynamics is working very, very closely with RAZBAM when it comes to the F-15E because of all the new capabilities that the F-15E is going to be bringing to the DCS World engine itself. So I have to, kind of guess that that also means that Eagle Dynamics is also working alongside with RAZBAM with creating and implementing new weapons into DCS, not just the GBU-28, but different things like the AGM-130 or the GBU-15 Hobo, things of that nature. Moving on, will the F-15E be able to fire the AIM-120D? Yes, the AIM-120 Delta is the newest, longest range version of, or variant, I should say, of the AIM-120 AMRAAM, and is not yet integrated into DCS World. The newest version of the AMRAAM that we have in DCS is the AIM-120 Charlie 5 variant. I have heard some rumblings that maybe there's going to be a Charlie 7 variant brought into DCS World soon, but I have no confirmation about that, and I'm almost certain that the AIM-120D is too new and its kind of capabilities are too secret to be brought to DCS World anytime soon. How has the Strike Eagle changed over the years? How has the need/usage of the Strike Eagle changed over the years? So kind of two questions kind of combined there. Got this question kind of a little bit throughout the Q&A session when I had that up there in my community. And I would say probably, again, I'm not an expert in this, and the Strike Eagle, there's not all that much in the way of publications about it. It's kind of the smallest community, one of the smallest communities within the USAF, so there's not very many books, not very much information. Most F-15 publications out there, books you can read, things like that, usually have like one chapter out of like 13 on the F-15E, so there's just not all that much info about it out there for, public everyday consumption. But I would say probably the biggest change for the Strike Eagle has been going from a purely low-level deep penetration to attack more or less strategic targets within the Soviet Union to then becoming more of a medium level close air support platform throughout the War on Terror years, and then moving to kind of a more austere environment, distributed application of force in the Pacific across Pacific islands, and moving to some anti-shipping rules and things like that. So it kind of shows the impressive capability of the aircraft being built for one thing, being a direct replacement for the F-111 Aardvark and its low-level deep penetration mission set, to then being a CAS platform throughout the global war on terror, to now with the pivot to the Pacific and, pure conflict with China, kind of moving to kind of a distributed force posture and going after a lot of more naval targets, I guess you could say. So I think that kind of answers that question as best I possibly can. Wizzo name and interface. What can we expect? An expressive and human-like gesture, or will it be more of a basic functionality? Again, we don't really know. I've definitely seen on the ED forums, a lot of folks want to have a female-voiced Wizzo in the backseat. I think that could be pretty cool and bring some more, representation to DCS World as a whole. But we really don't know about how we're going to be interacting with this potential future AI that RAZBAM is going to be creating. And our last question here from my community is going to be, what exactly is the main point of having a Wizzo if everything can be done in the front seat? Now, the biggest thing about this is I don't know if it really translates all that well to DCS world, but the biggest thing about having two people in an aircraft as opposed to having one person in the aircraft is you have a lot of workload alleviated away from the pilot and put onto the Wizzo. So in the air-to-ground environment, the pilot will be flying the jet. He'll be scanning the ground for SAM launches, scanning the air around him with the radar for enemy MiGs, while the guy in the backseat is looking for that tank or that bunker or that factory with the targeting pod. Things of that nature. So that way, when you're flying the F-15 or the FA-18 in DCS, you're doing all of that by yourself, and that's a lot of workload put onto you when you're having to look for SAMs, look for MiGs, use the radar, use the targeting pod, all that kind of stuff all at once, and you can definitely get very task saturated really, really quickly. But what if instead of being by yourself in the FA-18, you're now in the F-15E and you have a guy in the back seat? You're flying, you're using the radar to scan for MiGs, you're looking at the ground to look for SAM launches, you're looking around the aircraft to make sure you don't run into your wingmen, to look for any MiGs that may have squirted through your radar coverage. While the guy in their back seat, he's doing all the air-to-ground stuff. He's talking to the FAC on the radio. He's looking for that tank with the targeting pod. He's doing all that stuff in the back seat. And now you have much, much more mental bandwidth to do your job in the front, while he or she is using their mental bandwidth to do their job in the back seat. And of course, you're communicating together as well to create an intermeshed team. In DCS, this can either work really, really well or work really, really badly. In the real world, everybody's trained to a certain standard and everybody uses very standardized terminology for things, where in DCS, a lot of people are doing this for fun, of course. I mean, we're all doing it for fun, hopefully. And so people might not be on the same wavelength with a lot of things where they might be so in real life. And so some people can mesh really well and make a DCS multi-crew look amazing, whereas other times people can have a really bad time of it and not want to do it again. I think a really good example of some really well-meshed multi-crew was my latest Apache video, in which I was playing a FAC-A in the Apache with a human CPG in the front seat, and we were just on the same wavelength with everything, and he was just a massive, massive help. He was shooting at targets, he was using the gun, he was using the rockets, he was firing Hellfires, and I was just in the back seat flying the helicopter and working the radios and things of that nature. So like I said, it is all about alleviating workload from one person and distributing it to two people. And it makes a big, big difference in real life, if not in DCS as well. All right, guys, let's go ahead and move on to part 2 of today's Q&A video. We're now going to do an overview of Notso's unofficial frequently asked questions document for RAZBAM's F-15E Strike Eagle. Now, keep in mind, guys, that Notso was a former F-15E Strike Eagle pilot and is one of the SMEs that is helping RAZBAM to bring the Strike Eagle to life inside of DCS. Now, his document here is kind of hidden in the deep recesses of RAZBAM's Discord server, and I believe that it definitely deserves to be brought into the light and allow more of you guys to get your eyeballs onto it. So I will have a link down in the description and pinned in the comments down below for you guys to download it and take a look at it yourself. So let's go ahead and kind of pick and choose through this guy to allow us to get through this a little bit faster than reading the entire document. So the first question is, when is the Strike Eagle going to be released? And Notso says in approximately 2 weeks. Kind of the usual answer for people asking this question. What block of the Strike Eagle are we getting? Notso goes into a little bit more detail than I did here. He says the F-15E does not number their jets by production block number or lot number like the F-16 or F-A-18. Rather, the Strike Eagle uses software suites. The initial software suite for the DCS Strike Eagle is Suite 4 Plus, which is circa the 2005-2006, mid-2000s era, which we kind of already talked about in the first part of this video. However, he does note here that RAZBAM is planning to add features from earlier in the Strike Eagle's life and later in the Strike Eagle's life as well, but they won't be available right at early access release. Now, the next question goes deeper into that, where they ask, will the Strike Eagle be exactly correct for a Suite 4 Plus aircraft in the 2006 and 7 timeframe, or will it have some Frankenjet features? Notso says, yes, RAZBAM will build the module initially based on Suite 4 Plus features, but as every fighter jet in real life is never static, RAZBAM will likely add features that either make the module more playable to a wider audience, or will add capabilities that were added later or earlier if and when that data is available. It's not going to be a specific tail number frozen in time at a specific date. And just kind of I agree with Notso here. This is a really, really good thing. I think the more capability that's put into the aircraft will allow it to appeal to a broader audience and allow us who use these things in DCS just for fun and entertainment to have a much better time and apply the aircraft to lots of different applications and maybe, morph it into more of a Saudi Strike Eagle or a Singaporean Strike Eagle or a Korean Strike Eagle or whatever it might be. Next question is, what engines will this module have? And of course, just like I said earlier, it is going to be the F100 Pratt & Whitney 229s. Let's go ahead and try and say that again. The Pratt & Whitney 229 version of the F100. And so those are the more powerful version of the engines in the Strike Eagle to give us a little bit extra power in the dogfight arena, as well as, of course, climb, top speed, things of that nature. And critically, again, the question, will it have an AI Wizzo? Yes, RAZBAM stated that the plan is eventually to add some type of AI Wizzo. Can I fly it without a Wizzo? Yes, you can. Can I fly it from the back seat? Yes, you can. You can fly it from the back seat. There are dual controls in the F-15E. Will the Strike Eagle be multi-crew? The answer is yes, it will be multi-crew. If you don't have a human Wizzo, can I do everything from the front seat? Yes, you can. Once all the systems are turned on, everything is functional in the front seat just like it is in the back seat. However, there are a few toggles to turn on power to various systems of the aircraft, including the ICS, which in the F-15E refers to the internal countermeasures set, i.e. the jammer, and not just the intercom system, the raw equipment, which of course the radar warning receiver, the countermeasures dispensers, the targeting pod, and the EWWS system. So RAZBAM has stated that there will be hotkeys that will allow you to jump back and forth between the cockpits, as well as hotkeys to allow you to turn on these systems very, very quickly from the front seat without having to hop into the back seat. Now, the good thing about being in the back seat as opposed to the front seat is you will have 4 different MFDs as opposed to only 3 MFDs when you're in the front seat, allowing the Wizzo to multitask between the radar, the targeting pod, and other systems of the aircraft a lot more easily than the pilot in the front, who only has 3 MFDs. Again, Notso goes into, can we remove the CFTs in the game? And no, it's definitely a no. The CFTs and removal of those CFTs would require RAZBAM to have 2 different flight models for the F-15E. And of course, he goes into why the USAF never actually pulls the CFTs off, if only for maintenance and kind of testing purposes. Really interesting question here, in which someone asks, can the Strike Eagle fly without the nav FLIR and or the targeting pod? And yes, the jet can fly with none, one, or both. However, that's really rare, and that the Strike Eagle would fly without both pods in both training and combat. And there are some severe maneuvering limitations if only carrying one pod due to the asymmetrical forces on the aircraft by only having weight on one side of the jet or the other, which I think is really interesting and makes total sense as well. What weapons can they carry? Basically everything in the USAF inventory. Some really interesting stuff. It kind of goes into the usual list of weapons for the aircraft that you would expect. All the variants of the AIM-120 in DCS, the AIM-7, the AIM-9, all variants of the Mark 82 and Mark 84 series, all variants of the Paveway series of laser-guided bombs, including the 27 and 28, the GBU 31 and 38 JDAMs. And interestingly, RAZBAM is going to be including all variants of the AGM-65 Maverick air-to-ground missile that can be employed on the F-15E, even though the F-15E was never equipped operationally with these weapons. Only one base, as Notso explains later in the document, was ever actually allowed to do training with the AGM-65 on the F-15E, and that was dropped very early on in the Strike Eagle service life because it was very training intensive and required the aircrew to train a lot to use Mavericks when it wasn't necessarily a weapon that was going to be used all the time for the actual mission sets that the F-15E would have been tasked with in an operational environment. Another couple of interesting highlight weapons here is going to be the GBU-15 Hobo, the AGM-130, as well as the AGM-154 JSAL, which was tested with the F-15E, but was never actually issued to operational units and never used it in an operational capacity. But RAZBAM and Notso here are saying that the AGM-154 is definitely valid to have on the DCS version of the aircraft because it made it through the testing and operational evaluation testing at Nellis Air Force Base, and so therefore they're going to bring it to the F-15E. In DCS, that is. All versions of the WICMID, the BLU-107 Durandal anti-runway and taxiway bomb, all versions of the CBU-87 and 97, as well as the Mark 20 Rockeye. And interestingly as well, the AIM-9X Sidewinder will be integrated into the F-15E, even though the aircraft does not yet have the JHICMIS in the Suite 4 Plus version of the software of the F-15E. Now, this is important to note because the jet can fire the AIM-9X. It just can't use the super high off-bore sight abilities of the AIM-9X as a result. However, it is worth noting that the AIM-9X does give a massive leap in capability over the older AIM-9 Mike because of the fact that it has a longer range, it has a higher fidelity seeker head, it has better flare ejection, all of that good stuff that allows the F-15E to have a major boost in carrying the AIM-9X, even though it's not going to have the JHICMIS at first. Some weapons that are on the maybe or wish list include the AIM-120 Alpha, the Mark 82 or Mark 84 Air, the GBU-39, which is the small diameter bomb or SDB, the GBU-54 laser guided JDAM, the BDU-33 and Su-20 dispenser. He also goes into the fact that the DCS Strike Eagle will not have the B-61 nuclear weapon integrated into it in DCS, just as we had talked about in part 1 of this video. Older munitions for the Strike Eagle from the early days of the Desert Storm area will be added back onto the aircraft further on down the road, including the AIM Mark 20 Rockeye and the AIM-9 Papa. And they are listed in the Dash 1 of the aircraft, so it is probable that they will be included into the module for retro scenarios like Desert Storm, etc. Will we get the JHICMIS? Yes, eventually. RAZBAM has implied they now have the info they need, but whether the HMD will be available at release is still to be determined. So hopefully it will, but I wouldn't count on it, guys. What radar will the Strike Eagle have at launch? The APG-70 radar. which is, of course, the radar that was integrated into the aircraft from the initial start of production of the F-15E. The next question is, will we get the APG-82 AESA radar? No, not likely for a long time. This is a very, very secret radar, and the capabilities of this radar are definitely very hush-hush. So I wouldn't assume that we would have any AESA radars available in DCS for quite some time now. Somebody asked a really interesting question here. Can the Strike Eagle employ JDAMs on the upper CFT stations? No, these bomb rack units are not wired for smart weapons. However, JDAMs can be carried out in a ferry-only configuration. Export Strike Eagles, as well as the EX, have the newer smart BRUs on the upper row, but current USAF F-15Es do not. However, as you guys have seen probably in some press releases and things like that, you see F-15Es that are loaded up with 6 JDAMs along each CFTs for a total of 12 JDAMs on both sides. This is a ferrying configuration to allow the F-15 to be used as kind of a bomb delivery truck to get them to kind of an austere airbase in the middle of the Pacific. Ground crews can then pull those weapons off of the F-15E, and the F-15E has now delivered those weapons to that austere airbase to allow them to be attached to other aircraft, whether they be Hornets, Vipers, other Strike Eagles, things of that nature, and allow that jet to then take off and go about their mission. This allows the USAF to be able to deliver munitions to those very austere and far-flung air bases across the Pacific from a platform that can actually defend itself from, say, roving patrols of Chinese fighters, whereas, say, like an aircraft like a C-17 or a C-130 would kind of be a sitting duck for a Chinese flanker. How many AMRAAMs can the Strike Eagle carry? The Strike Eagle in USAF service can carry 8 AIM-120s maximum, with 4 on the wing stations and 4 on the CFTs. The Strike Eagle in DCS will not be an advanced Strike Eagle variant, such as the SA or the QA or the SE, where that has the ability to carry multiple racks of AMRAAMs on almost all the different stations of the aircraft. Does the Strike Eagle have stations 1 and 9 available to it on the aircraft? No, that is only an export and EX only thing. So that only applies to those Strike Eagle variants that are actually fly-by-wire, with the first one starting with the F-15SA, which is the Saudi advanced version, then the QA, which is the Qatari advanced version, and then the the EX, which is the latest variant for the USAF. Those 2 stations, number 1 and 9, are so far out on the wings of the F-15E that if you fired a munition from one side and kept the munition on the other side, because it's not a fly-by-wire airplane, the pilot would not be able to counter the asymmetrical forces on the jet, and the aircraft would kind of get out of control of the pilot, and it would just not be a great day. So those stations are deleted from the F-15E as a result. Can the Strike Eagle carry a harm? No, SEAD was and is not a USAF mission for the F-15E. Some export models can carry the harm. I believe that the F-15K, the F-15SG, the F-15SA, the F-15QA, and the F-15EX can carry the harm, as well as some other different anti-radiation missiles as well that are developed outside of the United States. The USAF has so many Block 50 F-16CJs and F-16CMs that it's kind of redundant for the F-15E to carry the harm. That's not in the mission set of the F-15E. They're a low-level penetrator to go in and hit strategic targets behind the lines, or at least that was what the Strike Eagle was originally developed for. And then, of course, the F-16CJs are going to be the ones running around firing harms at different SAMs. But for other Strike Eagle operators who don't have, squadrons worth of F-16s ready to fire harms at SAMs, they need to have the harm integrated into the jet itself to allow it to have some self-protection capabilities against those SAM sites. It would be pretty cool if RAZBAM could go in and integrate the harm at some point in the module's lifetime, but I wouldn't hold your breath for it. Does the Strike Eagle carry the SLAM or SLAM ER? That's a U.S. Navy only variant or weapon, I should say, in the United States military. Some export Strike Eagles have the ability to carry it, like the Republic of Korea F-15K, but not the USAF F-15E. Why does the DCS Strike Eagle have JSOW? It was never flown operationally. And in this question, Notso goes into why RAZBAM has decided to add it, and that's because it kind of made it through the operational and test phase. It's just that the USAF never decided to actually buy them in the end and integrate them into operational squadrons. But because the USAF F-15E is cleared to use the weapon, why not include it in DCS? Again, more options for DCS mission makers, more options for people in multiplayer servers, all that good stuff, which is great from my perspective. All right, so kind of moving through the document to find some other kind of cool questions here. This kind of funny one. Is the Strike Eagle good at air-to-air in general? And Notso says yes, with no explanation behind it. So that's pretty funny. Can the Wizzo shoot the gun? No. The trigger on the rear cockpit stick is disabled and is not actually molded into the stick and does not move. Can the Wizzo shoot missiles? No. All forward-firing ordnance, air-to-air missiles, the gun, etc., can only be fired from the front seat. The only exception is the Wizzo can shoot Mavericks from the back seat. Can the Wizzo drop bombs? Yes, the pickle button in the back is fully functional and freefall munitions, and the AGM-65 Maverick can be fired from the back seat. Can Wizzos air-to-air refuel and or land the aircraft? Technically, yes. They're not trained to do so, but pilots have and will continue to do so in the future, even though they are not necessarily allowed to do so from the backseat by regulation. The ejection sequence more or less works the same as the F-14 Tomcat. Norm is set for first the Wizzo goes, then the pilot. Aft initiate is where whichever crew member pulls the handles, the Wizzo goes first, the pilot right after. And solo, meant for pilot-only ferry. The rear seat is disabled, pilot pulls handles, only he/she will go. Moving through some of these, kind of see if we can find another interesting question that isn't too detailed for our video here. Are Strike Eagle crew chiefs cool? Absolutely. The jets do not turn a wheel if folks like Salty and others weren't there getting them ready to go for the air crew. That is definitely true, and the ground crew is always an integral part of any air ops, whether civilian or military. All right. So really interesting is the F-15E can employ the AGM-65, and if you have more than one AGM-65 on the aircraft, the pilot can actually take control of one Maverick, and the Wizzo can take control of a different Maverick, and you can independently lock the Mavericks onto two different targets and then fire them at will. So you can have the Wizzo actually firing a Maverick on, say, a tank off to the right of the jet, and the pilot can fire a Maverick to, say, a tank or vehicle off to the left-hand side of the jet, and allow for a really interesting kind of situation where you have the backseater and the front seater targeting two different targets with two different weapons on the aircraft. I think that is super cool, and I can't wait to do something like that in DCS with RAZBAM's Strike Eagle. So that's kind of it, guys, for when it comes to kind of the simple questions to answer from this document. Again, guys, I'm going to put a link for you guys to download this document in the comments down below. I hope you guys found this video to be informative about what you're going to be getting with the Strike Eagle when it releases, because again, there has been a lot of kind of misinformation out there about this module. A lot of the official information has kind of been spread out across lots of different sources and lots of different media platforms across the internet, and I hope this video is a good attempt to kind of merge all those and bring a lot of that information to one single place where a lot of your eyeballs and ears can get onto it and allow you to know exactly what you're going to be getting with this module, which I'm sure you guys can tell I am definitely hyped for. So we'll see you in the next one, guys. Fly safe out there and have a great time enjoying this beautiful game that is DCS World.